general prompts on our questionnaire for everybody, and then an open answer kind of, or open question kind of section as well. So we've got a mix of pretty much every one of the sections. So the first one being starling abatement. So there's a couple questions about starling abatement, starting with, trapping starlings. Are you trapping at your nest boxes? If so, how many staff and volunteers are you using to do that starling abatement? How regularly are you doing starling abatement? And then one question specifically asking, does more light deter starlings? And it specified if you're using an oval hole, which allows more light to get into the box, is that going to be, deterring the starlings being inside of that nesting cavity? So if anybody wants to take it away.
It's in the literature, though. Does anyone know? Someone did a study with internal light levels.
Yeah.
Okay. You might need to turn it on.
I don't know who.
Turn it on.
Might as well be a comb, I'm told. Someone did a study on it, I'm not sure who, but I think it was more light equals more starlings. Is that right? That sounds right. So, I'm not sure specifically the management actions you can do to lessen the light in the box, but we recommend people face their boxes towards the southeast and things like that. Anyone else?
Well, Tom, you've done a lot of.
Oh, yeah, starlings and I are pretty close. I'm not sure all the parts of that question, but in terms of starlings, I actually went away from an oval hole to 3-inch round only because the Van Eert traps, which are, in my mind, essential for starling control, they don't completely cover the opening in an oval. And what the starlings will do is they'll get their feet up on the top lip of the Van Eert trap and pull it down and leave. So you need a round hole for that. The Van Eert traps are the key. Without those, I probably would stop. They're very, very good. And I just want to qualify just one thing what I said about 3 times a week checking boxes. That's only up until the point when I see an egg. As soon as I see an egg, that's it. Then I do the dating ahead, and I won't be back for 48 days, 50, whatever it is, till banding age. So just to clarify that. But until there's an egg, that's what it's all about with the starlings is 3 times a week. Set the trap, set a bunch of traps, usually go around, pick them out, and the nesting material as well. Even if there are no starlings, I've many times seen kestrels on the top of a box, visit after visit after visit after visit. No activity in the box, the kestrel leaves, I go in the box, and there's starling nesting material. And the kestrels in our area don't seem to even want to go in there if there's material from the starlings, even if there's no starlings. So my last word on this is don't assume anything when you're observing your boxes. You've got to, with a camera or whatever, you've got to go in there. The story's laid out for you, clear as anything, if you get into that box, whether there's starlings or a nest depression for kestrels or whatever. So I'm very aggressive with that. And I think you saw from the slide over time, there's fewer and fewer boxes where starlings are an issue. Hopefully that keeps up. Anybody else?
Okay. Any other questions from the audience about starlings, or as Jordan and I have lovingly named them, Eurotrash? Start the disco music.
Did you know that they're protected over in England?
Thank Bill Shakespeare for that.
Yes, well, we're going to have a new relationship with England, so maybe we can transfer some of those starlings back.
We did pass the Gray Squirrel Act.
Good. You mentioned the Van Eert traps. Where do you get them? Do you need?
It's VANERT. If you just Google it, Van Eert traps. He's in Iowa, really cool guy. About $12, $13 a piece. He makes them for house sparrows. That's where he started, the house sparrow bluebird thing. He started it, for house sparrows. He makes a larger size for starlings. So it's just, you go to online and see that.
Okay. And since they're starlings, you don't need any.
No, they're invasive, so you're fine. Yeah. And the whole thing is that whole 3 weeks or so, that I call it the acquisition phase, the major time in whatever your latitude is where the starlings and the kestrels are totally competing. Once you get rid of those starlings, you open up those windows of opportunity, the kestrels, they will move in. But it's really intense for about 3 or 4 weeks.
Somebody else has their hand
I don't need that.
up. Okay.
I like it when I clean out the kestrel, the starling nest, I can put it in a 5-gallon bucket, carry it away. As we put it right on the ground, it's right there, it's only put it right back in. Take a bucket with you, haul it off. Do you agree or not?
Well, my starlings have a problem picking it up because usually they're minus body parts, so it's really not an issue.
Do you leave them as a warning to other starlings?
I tried that. I tried hanging, there was some literature on this, hanging a dead starling by the nest hole, or putting it down. I'm serious. Putting a dead starling on top of the box. Typically, the starlings just sidestep their brethren and get into the box. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't help.
Anything else about starlings?
I was just going to ask, with all the talk about starlings and just the competition and maybe more of a nuisance thing, I guess I'm not up on starling populations and competition, but is it considerable to look at starlings and the trends for starlings and possible effects that they've had on the kestrel?
So no one's going to believe me when I say this, but you can go to the BBS, the Breeding Bird Survey's website, and it'll show you that starlings have actually been declining across the U.S. at the same time as kestrels. So it seems like if that's the problem, then kestrels would be doing better. But certainly locally, they can compete with each other.
But look at the population, though. The population is 10 times what the kestrels are.
That's true. I mean, it could be above some threshold where it has a negative effect.
One point about the Van Erd trap is, and it was brought up in the New York discussion, is if you catch something other than a starling, you're violating the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so you got to be real, you need to be careful of what you're doing. And certainly if you don't monitor what you're doing and you kill protected species, you're,
Oh, yes.
that's a serious issue. So, you've got to pay, if you're doing that, you don't want to be sure you're just catching starlings, and you certainly got to be monitoring it. You don't want to start killing protected birds. You've got other problems you're going to be dealing with.
Another.
Yep.
A few years ago, someone was concerned about the Van Erd trap and talked to me about it and sent me one. And I thought that the intention was to use that to capture kestrels. And my assessment of it was that was a bad idea because it's really powerful. One of my physics colleagues and I thought, well, let's figure out exactly, quantify this. And so we would spring it with a marble and measure how high it could launch the marble. But we couldn't do it because it would smash into the ceiling tile. I broke a chicken, a drumstick, bone with it. I thought, this is not something that I would do. Using for starlings, if you're using for starlings, that's something else. But I would be very, very reluctant to try to capture a kestrel with that.
And just to follow, there's never been a bird ever killed by a Van Erd. They don't kill birds, they just restrict their movements. And if you check the trap every 15 minutes in a cycle, then you just release whatever might be in there, and then it's been fine.
Does anybody have any recommendations for where to best site nest boxes to avoid starlings? Is that the $1 million question? Okay, let's see what we have next. Let's talk about nest boxes. This is placement, construction, materials, substrate. So one question is, should I be painting nest boxes?
We don't recommend it, and in general, just because we aren't sure what kind of paints people are using. When we disseminate protocols, we aren't sure who's going to use them, so we try to stick to the safest thing possible.
About construction, I saw a lot of different designs here over the past 2 days, and one of the things that strikes me, well, what we do in our project, we use a really simple box design where the one side opens up and it pivots. When I make the boxes myself, and I will cut out kits, and one of the pieces is both the door. Well, the door, I'm right-handed, so I like to have it on the side, on the left side as you look at the hole, and so they always open on that side for our boxes. And the other side is just a wall, and so they're the same size. They're actually matched. They're both matched, and so that way the angle is going to be the same. So I just keep track of it that way. For the side that pivots, I lower that down about 3/4 of an inch so you get ventilation along that top. And I always open them from the bottom to the top. We tried, the ones we did in Florida, I cut the last several inches off to make it sill. And I had a lot of problems with fire ants, and it's really hard to clean everything out because you have to scoop it up over that sill. So when we started in Florida, in New Jersey, we just didn't put a sill on those. And we did have some chip roll out. So that's probably not a good idea. So I tried to retrofit the boxes, actually put a tray with a sill on it. So you could just pull the tray out, dump stuff out, put it back in. And that's really convenient, but we have a problem with ants with the two flat pieces like that. So we generally will get ants. So I ended up retrofitting all the boxes with an internal sill that's beveled. So you still have the same floor space covered with chips. I am reluctant to use a box that has a hinge on the top. First of all, I'm also very cheap, so I have to buy hinges to do that. But you have to get them higher on the ladder to do that. And our boxes in Florida were mostly around 18 feet from the bottom of the entrance hole to the ground directly below. But depending on placement and sites, we had boxes anywhere from 12 to 20 feet high. And there were no differences in occupancy rates. So since then, as I replaced boxes, I put them a little bit lower, down around 13, mostly 14 feet probably. And that's sufficient. And plus opening on the side and opening up, you just don't have to get nearly as high on the ladder. We've had, in New Jersey, we've gone up and down the ladder about 16,000 times in the past 22 years. And no one's fallen off yet, but the older I get, the more about that I'm a senior citizen scientist. So I'm getting more and more risk averse. And so that's something to consider.
Especially if you, I think, have volunteers that are helping, that's also a risk to consider too.
Exactly.
Let's see what else we've got here.
Can I have something related to painting boxes?
Sure.
In regards to painting boxes, if you have a box out in the open on a post, would painting it white, is there a problem with overheating in those boxes? And would white paint help minimize that overheating? And how much more life expectancy do you get out of a box by painting it versus not painting?
Life expectancy on the box
Of the
itself.
box itself.
I don't know, because we don't paint ours, and one of the things, a lot of the boxes we made in Florida, we made with galvanized nails. And a friend of mine who's in construction asked me, why are you making those impermanent? And I immediately switched over to decking screws, which last a lot longer. We used to use rough cut cedar, and that's more or less not available. And so now we do pine, and pine works fine, it warps more, and it's longer, it takes us longer to assemble a box, since we have to pre-drill the holes. The cedar was soft enough, we could put the decking screws straight through that. But we get 10 years out of a pine box.
Do you have any problems with did you have any problems with overheating in Florida in that sunshine?
Probably not. And that sort of relates to direction. In Florida, what we wanted to do is we tried not to direct the hole toward the south. The winds are coming from all directions, but the hottest part of the day is in the afternoon, and we didn't want the sun actually shining into the box at that time. But so boxes were used although their availability, the west-facing boxes, but they had the same success rate as all the others. So I'm assuming that it was in shape, they're probably on a tree. So I think the birds are pretty good at assessing those kinds of things as they choose the site.
Did you site them on poles so that the pole could potentially be casting a shadow on it during the hottest part of the day?
Well, a lot were on pine trees as well.
Okay. Couple, okay, go ahead.
What is the lowest you recommend putting a box in terms of feet, 10 feet, 12 feet?
Yeah, so we haven't systematically done that. What I can say is that our boxes that are down at around 12 feet are as likely to be used as the ones up at 20. Beyond that, I can't say what is too low. While I'm thinking of that, I saw people using a lot of different things for support structures, and again, it's probably the dollar sign is my biggest motivator on this, but I don't use 4x4s. I've used 16-foot tall 2x4s, and those are kind of an exciting ride on the ladder. So I don't do that anymore. I bring them down to about 12 feet, and instead of using a 4x4, I use two 2x4s that are nailed together to make like an I-beam, so you get the structural support. It's a lot cheaper, it's lighter, so it's easier, especially if you have to do a death march, to take it out into the field. But that's really sturdy.
Can I
Just,
say
I've
that?
got about 3 or 4 boxes at 10 feet that have had no problems at all, and this year I'm actually going to experiment with about a half a dozen at 8 feet, just leave them lowered and see what happens. I don't know if it's going to make any difference, but we'll find out.
So that's a good point. That's exactly why I think we're getting together. No one's, as far as I know, no one's found out how low you can go. So
We've had 4 feet boxes get.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say that in Montana, you saw a lot of my boxes were just on fence posts with an extender, a 2x4 extender up. I've had them nesting as low as 6 feet, and a lot of our boxes are just at 8 to 10 feet. No problem at all. That's what they seem to be happy with.
Great.
Okay, go ahead, Raheem.
A couple of points about box construction. I learned the hard way with 100 nest boxes on an island in the Gulf of Maine that it's important to build them in a modular fashion. So you can go up there and replace a front. So 2 points from that. Do not use the Gingert plans which call for construction adhesive. And also use screws, it makes it easier. And finally, for closing your hinge, use a duplex nail, which is double-headed, which is much easier to grab when you're up on the ladder than trying to get your fingernails under if the wood is swollen around it. So, duplex nails are things that are used in the construction trades with concrete forms and things like that. They're just the right size so that I can grab them and pull them out rather than a single-headed nail.
One of the things that we do is actually lower that. The door is about 3/4 of an inch lower, so I can grab that entire bottom of that door, so I don't have to actually grab a doorknob, to pull it. So I can pull it that way. When they're new, they stay up by themselves because they're nice and tight. I'm custom fitting this to make sure it's tight. But if you put the door up, when you put the hinges, I'm just using nails from the side as the hinges, so it'll swivel on that. Give yourself enough room so that above the nail, that part is swiveled into the inside of the box. Put a hole through there. You can use the same, if you use a duplex nail as your pin to keep the door closed, you can stick it through there and that'll hold that door open for you. So you don't have to use your head, so you don't get chiggers and stuff.
JF, did you have something that you wanted to add?
No,
I
it
saw
was the
you,
same thing. We had
raising your hand.
boxes pretty low as well at Hawk Mountain, and we had the same pattern, the same design as John has, so it didn't work really well over the year.
Go ahead.
I just had sort of an anecdotal comment on the nest height thing. I was monitoring some boxes in California several years ago and had a box on a utility pole, sort of normal height, maybe 10, 12 feet up. The nest was, had young in it. I came back for a check, I think, to ban the young. The box was on the ground. It was an old box, it just fallen down because of rust. And I expected to find nothing or just dead chicks. Opened it up and 4 snarling beasts in there. Oh, okay. There was a stump next to the pole that was maybe no higher than 2 feet. I set the box on that, put a little baling wire around it so it wouldn't fall off. And the chicks came back, a little while later for fledging time, and they were all sitting up on the wire. So like they didn't choose it that height, but they continued using it. So just as an anecdotal.
Go ahead, Zach.
Actually, two questions. If I understand, John, and you're describing how you open from the hinges at the top and then you open it up so that you can be at the floor as opposed to opening it this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so when I'm on a ladder and I'm facing the side of the box, that side is actually the door. And so there's a nail that comes through here through the front and a nail that comes through the back. So it swivels on those two
You haven't had
nails.
an issue with young ones almost falling out?
So I do have a sill in there, but when I open it, I'm a little careful because sometimes they will still lean on it. So I'm taking a look and making sure that I don't just pop it up.
That still makes, that's good, that makes sense. The second question has to do with, and this is an issue, we don't have nice straight trees in Nebraska, so it's often hard to get something kind of oriented straight up and down. Could there be an issue with either tilting one way slightly or another way slightly because of the angle of the trunk of the tree that you're putting it on? Has anybody had any experience with that? I mean, I think weather's an issue. You know, rain would be easier to get in, but I don't know if anybody else has had to deal with that.
I try to get them as level as I can. I've got a few that are not, and so I tilt them away. So any rolling would be not out the door. But they're all pretty close to being level.
I don't think it has a big impact. I mean, those birds can nest in natural cavities that are not level, so.
You can make it level when you put the chips in.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's a big issue.
Go ahead.
Paint. I've made 3 nest boxes. The 2 smaller ones, the original ones that I used, I gave to Clearwater Canyon Sellers and traded them for half a case of wine. But paint on the outside, those boxes are now going on 9 years old. The new box that I had is about 6 years old. The paint on the outside protects it, keeps the weather in check. You won't have to change the box out, you have to change parts because it's glass. And deck screws, that is the right thing. Use the deck screws. Pre-drill with a 16-inch hole, that gets it in there. And when you use deck screws, get yourself a box or a can of Johnson's paste wax. This is a carpenter trick, the carpenter taught me. You dip the screw in the wax. You drill it in. If it starts to squeak, back it right out. It is hot. Stick it back in the wax and work the wax in there. He showed me that, and he typically does not drill holes even for his furniture. And what happens, the screw goes in, deforms the wood, actually makes threads in the wood that are strong. You want to avoid or make your pilot hole as small as physically possible for the wood you're drilling. You do have to pre-drill oak, but nobody's going to build an oak next time. But when you build a nest box out of pine, and you get that wood, you get it cut. Don't get it in the sun. Get it all pre-drilled, dry fit, preset your screws, because it'll turn into bananas as soon as you get it out in the sun.
Okay.
And the other question I had about, how many people are using hinges on the doors?
Hinges versus just nails?
Yeah. Anybody?
Raise your hand if you use hinges.
I use hinges, but I'll tell you what kind of hinges you use.
I think everybody else is, I guess, too cheap.
Okay. Well, I found out if you are using hinges, I have found out if you go and buy 2 small hinges to put on there, by the time you get done messing around with those and trying to get them aligned and everything else, it's easier to buy a stick of piano hinge. Because the piano hinge will not work. You put it in, you do all your sets in there, cut it to length, evenly space it, set it, screw it in, it'll go in, and you will never have a binding door, ever.
I used hinges, but only because they were on the boxes that took over.
Okay.
Any new boxes.
So you inherited your hinges.
Yeah. Any new ones I make like new ones.
Okay. There's another nest box question. Do cameras in nest boxes interfere or deter nesting of kestrels?
I don't think so. At least for our Kestrel cam box, it's been occupied every year since we put it up. Megan, what do you think? doing cameras.
Right, yeah, so we originally started with cameras inside the box, like sort of pointing out the door. And again, we only had like 8 to 18 boxes starting out, but we've had, again, up to 100% occupancy, 91% success rate. And then we had issues with nestling feces getting on the camera halfway through the nestling period. So I started moving cameras to the outside lip there halfway through the season. And yeah, I did an analysis to see if that affected, fledgling production in terms of, interfering with the adults. And no effect. I mean, we saw in the video, I would move a camera and within an hour, the female would be back. So I don't think there's any influence. And again, when possible, we would install the camera before the breeding season because we use cheap cameras. So we just put them in all the boxes because we had such high occupancy. But yeah, even moving the cameras halfway through the season, we didn't find an effect.
A different option that I tried is I don't have the money for nest cameras and all that, but I built I call it like an in-law apartment on the side of the box. And what it does is it houses a GoPro camera, and there's a sliding panel that you can slide slightly open to expose the lens of the camera. So the camera's not in the box, it's looking through the side of the box. What I like about that is you get eye-level video of the birds. It's not top-down. It's cheap. And when you're done, you just slide the panel back and it becomes a solid side. Ejecting onto the lens can be an issue, but with GoPros you only get 3 hours of recording, and that's a problem because the card's full. So that's a huge problem. You don't want to be in there and out of there all the time. It's another option, cheap.
I'm statistically significant. I only have one box. I've had a camera in it 7 years, 7 nestings, so it hasn't seemed to degrade anything at all.
Is anybody putting cameras outside of the boxes and seeing any significant impacts or anything like that?
Same thing, the GoPros are mounted on an arm outside to get footage coming in the prey delivery.
Mm-hmm.
That does seem to be any issue.
I put a camera on a lamp post about 25 feet from the Kestrel nest box pointing at the opening, and I did that because I wanted to document the ability of kestrels to fledge and successfully get to the tree. I've determined that a bigger nest box gets the kestrels into a tree without hitting the ground, and I wanted to document that. I've got a video of the two of them taking off, leaving the nest box. They drop about 5 feet, and then they climb into the tree, so you don't get any predation on the ground.
Nice. Let's talk about substrate in nest boxes a little bit. I've heard everything from pine shavings to mulch to the big bark chips to pea gravel on top of wood or pine shavings. So thoughts about substrate, best practices, any ideas? Any and all of the above?
Pine shavings, I've read and heard don't use cedar. I think it's an irritant to the eyes or something like that. Rough pine shavings, something that isn't too light and too powdery, something that's a little bit on the coarse side. That's what I use.
We haven't tested any of those things properly, but I don't think it has big of an impact. Just my opinion.
One thing I'd encourage you to do is if you're thinking of using different substrates, or you're thinking about painting your box or not painting your box, or whatever it is, some sort of design change or something you're going to do different, I really encourage you to well, not only document it, but design it in a way that you randomly pick some boxes to get that treatment and others not. And that way, at the end of your season, you've got some powerful data, especially if you randomly do it, because if it's random and you find a difference, then the difference is probably due to that treatment, rather than if you, with all the boxes, say at the top of the hill you paint, all the ones at the bottom of the hill you don't paint, you don't know how to interpret your results. But if you randomly apply that to it's half of your boxes and half not, you've got some powerful data at the end of that.
And just make one change at a time.
Yes, unless it takes, if you have one change that you can apply to 20 boxes and not apply to 20. Now you've got good sample sizes. If you want to do 2 simultaneously, you'll need larger samples to be able to draw statistical significance.
Go ahead.
Any thoughts on pine needles? We use pine needles in our purple martin nest because they do not store moisture. And never used them in my Kestrel boxes, but I just wanted to know if you had any negative.
Well, there might be natural cavity with pine needles, so I mean, I don't see it as a big issue, but I've never tried it myself, so I don't know. But there's something that could be found in natural cavities, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's okay.
Okay. Any other burning questions about nest boxes?
So there's a technique that Bluebird and other nest box managers do called pairing, where you have a nuisance species, like a house sparrow or starling, you can place a box there for that species, and hopefully it'll leave your target species alone. And that way they both have, you have a small box for a starling, a big box for a kestrel, and they don't bother each other as much. Has anybody tried that with kestrels? Anybody know anything about whether that would keep the starlings busy while your kestrels retreat a nest?
I did try that. Starlings, I read or heard that starlings won't tolerate each other really close together, so I paired, basically almost back to back. Some of them were 2 or 3 feet apart, figuring, okay, the starlings will take one, they'll be happy. They won't tolerate starlings in the other one, so, the kestrels will use the other one. That was the plan, but there were starlings in both of them. Yeah, I did 6 paired boxes like that over 2 seasons, and it didn't make any difference whatsoever, unfortunately.
That's a great idea. What it makes me think of is, I've never seen people put 2 kestrel nest boxes on the same pole or right next to each other. Often we have a hard time finding a support structure in the middle of an open area, and I'm reluctant to put them on the woodland edge. So you might want to try this, is put them on woodland edges, but 2 boxes. One's going to get a squirrel. Are squirrels territorial, gray squirrels? Will they both nest will 2 squirrels nest that close together? Or will that keep a nest box open for a kestrel? Someone should try that.
Go ahead.
Could we quickly talk about the use of predator guards and if they're successful or not?
So I don't think anyone's actually tested the efficacy of predator guards for kestrels. That's actually something that me and Robin were talking about, combining the AKB data with the NestWatch data to sort of see if it works for kestrels too.
I can speak to the fact that we didn't have a whole lot of kestrels, but we had other kinds of owls, saw-whet owl, we had barn owls and wood ducks and other similar things with a larger hole that could potentially have larger predators get in it, and it was effective across the board. But can't speak too much.
And I think that would be your issue too. So maybe a predator guard, you're putting it up to keep a raccoon or a snake or something from climbing your pole or your tree, but starling are still going to come in and peck the eggs. So I mean, we've had boxes even where we had one with 6 eggs last season where we had predator guard, but because they had a pole next to the pole as support, it was able to get up and clamber over too wide of flashing. But it depends on if you've got other things in that mix that may, will negate the effect of it. Then you're still going to have to deal with this area's starling density is a lot higher than other areas. It'd be interesting to see in an area where there aren't, where people say, oh yeah, we get a starling or a few starling, as opposed to out east where it's like there's 30 in a tree, and when you evict one, the next one flies in. That I would wonder if that back-to-back box would work in a situation like that better than here, where there's just so many of them. And I'm saying that they're going to be a few feet away from each other, just giving them more opportunity.
Yeah.
If we start doing back-to-back boxes, we need to be careful how we're calculating occupancy too. So by definition, one will always be there.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Okay. So next section is talking auxiliary markers. So Bruce, do you want to get us started with how to get those permits?
Well, I mean, basically, it's if you have a banding permit, you can request authorization for auxiliary markers. The one thing we'd be looking at is your experience in terms of actually using markers, and for the most part, it doesn't require a huge amount of experience for light bands. Wing tags is an entirely different situation because you've got to know exactly how and where to place them, or you can do damage to the bird. So that's where, certainly for wing tags, if that's something, and that's a whole controversial issue anyway, but if that's something you would definitely need to be trained in how to attach a wing tag to a bird before we'd ever approve that. And then basically, the information that we would be looking for is the species and the location, and then what you intend to use, if they're color bands, what colors you intend to use, if they're codes, and the codes are, it depends who's making your bands, because for 8-track bands, basically the Navy keeps track of all that, and so he sort of magically assigns the codes so that they don't conflict. But if someone else is manufacturing your bands, then we need to be sure that the color and code combinations are unique, or we've got problems. So those are the types of issues for that. For geolocators or any of the other technology, again, we would be looking for your experience on how to attach, use the harnesses, or whatever it is, however you're attaching it to the bird, your experience in doing that, and especially the harness and knowing what is a proper fit and what is not a proper fit is probably as much art as science, and you really need to be trained by someone who knows what they're doing to understand how to do it properly, or you can very easily, an improper fit can very easily kill the bird. And so, it really depends what you're doing in terms of or what you're proposing to do. But, we would be looking to be sure that you have the necessary training for whatever techniques you're proposing to use. That's pretty much it. I mean, what I would say after listening to today is I'm not sure that any of the devices or any of the technology like geolocators or anything else that needs to be, where you need to recapture the bird, whether that, it doesn't sound like a very good idea to me for kestrels. For starlings too, but for kestrels, basically, there's two things. One, it sounds, any of these birds can be hard to recapture. And that, and that's one of these issues. If you can't recapture the bird, then basically putting these devices on the bird doesn't make a lot of sense. And if they're hard to recapture, well, that's one issue. And the other issue is sight fidelity. And I'm hearing, really low sight fidelity rates for these birds. And when you start talking only 20% or 25%, basically you're marking a lot of birds that basically are going to be carrying these devices for no reason, because you'll never see them again. And so, for us, if you get much below 40 or 50% sight fidelity, it doesn't really make sense to use these devices, because your return rate's going to be so low. Then you've got the problem, can you catch them again? And then, so you're not going to catch all the birds the second time. And then you've got the problem, especially with geolocators, is a lot of those devices don't work properly. You're going to have 20 to 30% of the devices that you'll catch the bird and download them, and there's no data or very limited data on them. So you can put 20 geolocators out there, you may only get 2 or 3 devices back with decent data. And then, you have such a low sample size, you don't know what that data really tells you. So, what I'm hearing here is that really, the technology that requires the recapture of birds doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, at least at this time. And we're really going to need to wait until the technology is such that, the devices that, the satellite transmitters, devices that don't require the recapture of birds are small enough and reliable enough to be placed on kestrels before you're really going to have the technology that's going to make sense for tracking the movements at that level. So, you know, I wouldn't guarantee in the future that I'm going to allow anybody to put any more geolocators on these birds, because it just doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
Yeah, to back that up, I'm blessed to have a master bander who's really, really tough. And he said, the one time we tried geolocators, he said, we're not even going to have that discussion until you can document that you have at least 50 or 60% site fidelity, meaning returning to the study area, not to the same box. So over time, it was running between 55 and 65, 68%. And then it was more of an option, but we don't plan on doing it in the future.
You know, one thing I would add is at least something for the partnership to think about because of this training requirement and the fact that you know, I'm sure that there are people up here who know how to attach a harness to a Raptor, but basically there might be some, you know, there may be a need to actually try to make arrangements to provide training opportunities for those who want to learn a technique to learn from those who know how to do it. And it could be everything from, you know, it could be auxiliary markers, it could be capture techniques outside the breeding season, you know, whatever, because, you know, basically the requirement for either capture techniques or any of this is you've got to know how to do it before we're going to issue the authorization. And in a lot of cases, people don't know who to talk to get that training. And part of my problem in the lab is because of the Privacy Act, I'm really limited on my ability to tell, especially members of the public, to provide them with the names and contact information for banders. And so I can't necessarily, if someone comes to me and says, oh, I want to learn how to band birds, I can't tell them, oh, here's, you know, talk to Dave or talk to, you know, anybody up here. I've got to say, well, you know, you're going to have to find somebody and learn from them because I can't, you know, the Privacy Act prevents me from telling you that. So this may be something where this partnership both needs to identify members who have particular expertise and then at times you know, provide training opportunities for either members of the partnership or those who want to become members to participate so they can develop those skills, because I think that's going to be necessary.
Well, I know that I'm coming at this from, you know, doing some solid owls, and they're really talking about, you know, establishing some, you know, a series of antennas so that, you know, smaller technology like this type of
Modus, yeah.
You know, can't we build on that to do the same thing with Kestrel?
You can. I mean, Modus is, you know, that's another long story. I mean, the problem with Modus is that right now the antennas are mostly situated along the coast. So for the Kestrel's migrating along the Atlantic coast, it might generate some useful data. For those birds in a sort of a broadband migration across the central United States, you know, they're not going to help you. And again, I'm a little leery about using these auxiliary markers as a replacement for bands, simply because, you know, in a lot of cases, the nanotags are being used in the same way that bird bands are being used. You know, basically, you put it on a bird and you hope that it flies by a Modus antenna somewhere and tells you something. But actually, for Modus, it's only 1 out of 10 birds that actually get any data for. The other 90%, they don't. And those are birds that are going to be carrying that nanotag. Again, most of them are attached by harnesses, so they're going to be carrying that nanotag for the rest of their, as long as they're wearing that harness, for no real purpose. And so I'm a little leery of saying, oh, yeah, let's go put nanotags on all these kestrels, knowing that maybe only 1 out of 10, you know, that's better than the 1.5% rate we're getting with aluminum bands, but that's still 90% of your kestrels are carrying something that we're not 100% sure, you know, it could, you know, isn't harming the birds, at least, you know, in some way. And so, from my perspective, if there's a study, you know, a specific study where that technology is useful, you know, we would certainly consider that. And there, you know, and that might be, there may be situations if you wanted to look at local movements of kestrel, say post-fledging or something, and you had a lot of towers in a small area, and you had birds moving around in a small area, then that would make a lot of sense. But just to put the nanotags on birds and turn them loose and hope they fly by a tower somewhere isn't a real, to me, it's not a real efficient way of getting information.
I think one of the solutions maybe we need to work on is how do we increase the recapture rate? What do we need to do to increase that? Do we need to get more people trapping kestrels? We need to get more people observing kestrels. I guess you can see these tags, binoculars or scopes or whatever.
You mean the color markers, things like that?
Well, either one.
Well, the tags, I mean, the nanotags, no, you're not going to see a nanotag on a bird necessarily, especially on a kestrel. I mean, there's a couple of issues, and one, there's a technology that wasn't mentioned yesterday, or actually a new satellite system that's going by the acronym of Icarus. I don't know how many of you are, I'm sure you are. But basically, there's a new system, I think, in the testing phase now with basically the satellite. I think it's actually attached to the manned station, the space station. It's in low Earth orbit as opposed to the current system, which is in a high Earth orbit. And if it works as advertised, basically what that will mean is that anything that's right now, any VHF radio will become a satellite transmitter. It's powerful. Basically it's in a lower orbit, so it can pick up the VHF frequencies, and this will become satellite transmitters. So that will greatly reduce the cost of the transmitter. Right now, satellite transmitters $1,000 to $3,000, depending on what you're getting. That will reduce that down to the range of $100 to $200. And at that point, then and plus they're a lot lighter. You're talking about things that right now you can put on any passerine, and certainly kestrels can carry without any difficulty. And then you can start using, that's a situation where you could get real-time information on the movements of birds. So, if you want to get, at that point, then you've got technology that can start to provide the level of information that you're looking for. In terms of, but again, that's for tracking movements. If you want to get at survivorship, then really you're talking about something that involves a permanent marker on the bird. And then you're talking about some sort of color marking, color band, something like that, so you can look at get resightings of individual birds over a period of time. And that technology we have now, I think the question here is how it gets coordinated and how it gets set up in a manner so that you can actually collect data that informs us of the demographic parameters that we want to measure at the geographic scale. We want to measure them. And, again, this is all doable, but it's going to take coordination. It's going to be something that the partnership wants to do. But that's as Dave would attest to, that the marking the birds is the easy part. It's the resighting that gets challenging. And so, that's and time consuming and not necessarily a really sexy thing to do, because you can spend a lot of time and not see any marked birds. And so, to do this and to get good data may not be something that fits in well with necessarily with a citizen science approach. But at the same token, with the advance in digital photography, in a lot of cases, it's easier to identify marked birds from photographs than it is from trying to identify them in the field. And so, it might be something where, you might be able to enlist people who are taking photographs to take photographs of the bird, of the kestrels, or when because you can get more resightings that way. But again, it depends really what the priorities of the partnership are in terms of where they want to go with the project, and what are the what are the next priorities in terms of the data need.
So that kind of leads to this next,
There's a hand in
oh,
the
who had the hand? Go ahead.
So I come from the world of shorebirds, where we put markers on birds quite a lot, and we've been trying, shorebirds are seen by a lot of members of the general public, and we have been trying to sort of harness these bird watchers to report these, and we do find that there's a lot of different colors of markers being used in shorebirds is one of the challenges, but it's challenging to try to communicate to members of the general public what they need to report. And so I think in many cases, actually photos is better, because if they take a photo and they're not sure if it's light green or dark green, well, we can tell from the photo whether it's a light green or a dark green marker, and because we're used to reading the codes on the markers and that sort of thing. So the photography route that Bruce was suggesting, I think, has actually got a number of advantages over having people trying to read these and turn them in, especially when you're dealing with untrained people, just members of the general public.
Well, in this next, it's more of a statement than a question, but it says, looking forward to a standard protocol for auxiliary bands or color bands in an alphanumeric code, similar to what is being used for peregrine falcons. So I don't know if that's been a discussion to start that kind of standardization.
Dave and I talked about it at lunch, yeah, we had a discussion about it.
Get it all figured out.
We expect a fully written paper expressing all the things you guys decided.
Again, it sort of depends what you're going to do. I think there's a need to coordinate what's going on, and at two levels. One, and I don't want to pick on Mark's study in North Carolina, but it's an example of right now the use of uncoded, just the plain plastic markers. And we regulate that in the lab, and I'm sure we authorize Mark to put it on Kestrels in North Carolina. And if there's anybody else who's using a similar light band on Kestrels in North Carolina, we ask him to coordinate with people in the area to try to avoid duplication. So he would know what he's using on his birds and what they're using on their birds, and so they know what they're doing, which is fine. The problem is when Mark's birds, if they migrate south and go to Florida, and someone in Connecticut's using light bands too, and they're not, they're far enough apart that they wouldn't have coordinated with each other during the breeding season, because that's not an issue. But when they get down to Florida and they have birds that are marked with the same color combination, we don't know if they came from Connecticut or North Carolina. And so that's a problem with the use of the uncoded markers. And there's only so many colors out there, and if these are long-term projects, each band is going to want to use the whole array of colors, and before long they're going to have. It's inevitable that even within any of those regional flyways that we define, you're going to have duplications, and it will be fine during the breeding season, but it's not going to, if we get reports during the non-breeding season, we're not going to know whose bird it was. So, that's an issue, and again, something that I'm not sure we're going to resolve at this table or this discussion, but that's one of the problems. And the question is sort of, if that's an issue, then how do we try to address something like that? For the coded markers, then we have the same coordination issue, because basically you want the color of the band, the color of the code, and the code combination to be unique. And right now that's what we're requiring. That's what Nagy does with his A-craft bands. For the shorebirds or whatever, that's what we would assign in the BBL if there's someone else who isn't already assigning it. The question that comes about is, using the shorebirds as an example, basically the color for the shorebird light flags are actually a country-based system. So that, light green is United States, and white is Canada, and orange is Argentina, and I forget, what Brazil is.
Red is for Chile, blue is for Brazil.
Yeah, so the color, each country has a different color. So even if you just see the flag, the color of the flag, at least you have some idea of, what country the shorebird was marked in. And, you know, the codes are unique in that too, but, you know, you have that type of coordination so that, you know, the color actually is informative of at least some portion of the range where the bird was marked. And the question would be whether or not that type of a system could be set up for kestrels. If people want to do that, you know, I'd have to look to see what colors have already been assigned, and, you know, but basically that type of a system could be set up. So even if you can't read the code, you might know, well, it came from New England, or it came from, you know, it's the Intermountain West, or, you know, you might have it on a regional basis or something. So at least it would be, you'd get some information from the band, even if you can't identify it to an individual bird. And so that, you know, that's a possibility too, but that's something we'd have to coordinate within this group and then figure out what's been assigned, and then, you know, how we could do something going forward. Gene? Yeah.
Well, and I would say the other thing that people, so we got the shorebird marking technique from people in Europe who've been doing this a lot as well, and, you know, and we've realized that there are some letters that look enough like each other that you should not really be using both letters. So we have what we call the shorebird alphabet, which is actually only 15 letters long plus all 10 numbers. And you gotta, you know, there's a lot of shorebirds marked, and so we have real issues with running out of alphanumeric. We use 3-letter codes, and we basically have used all of the codes, possible codes for one color, the dark green flags, so light green flags. Now we're using dark green flags because US has to use green, and, you know, at some point we're going to run out of codes for the light, for the dark green. Not anytime soon, fortunately, but you know, so consider readability, and, you know, the fellow from Nevada, they were using the alphanumeric codes. And again, you might take advantage of his experience in reading these codes and what letters he's using, and whether certain letters are more likely to have mistakes. And you got to realize also when you're doing this that there is a certain level of mistake. And so, like in the shorebird world, we often will do, and again, mainly this is with the red dots and the red turnstones in Delaware Bay. So it's quite a different system. You know, if we only see a bird once, if a code only gets reported once, basically during our field season of a month, then we look at that highly skeptically and say, you know, what's the chance of that a misread? And, you know, we'll look to see, like, well, when was that bird banded? If it was banded 10 years ago, and you know, it hasn't been seen for the last 3 years, then we're like, it's probably, so you know, you while you are collecting a lot of good data, you are also potentially getting incorrect readings of your reuse flags, and you got to be prepared to deal with this in your analysis, and have some sort of standards. I mean, because you can't just, you know, throw out data that can't be right, out it goes. I mean, you can't, in the world of science, you can't just like throw out data because you don't like it. So you got to be prepared for the fact that, you know, no matter how well trained your observers are, you know, they're going to be making mistakes. They're making mistakes. You know, they see AB and they look down their notebook and they write down BA, you know, or something like that. So think about the letters, and you know, anybody who wants to know what the shorebird alphabet is, go out and look up the Pan-American Shorebird Marking Protocol, something like that.
Well, basic. I mean, that BBL does the same thing, and we would do the same. You know, basically like zeros and O's. We don't, you know, basically we don't authorize an O because you can't tell from a zero. So, you know, we use the 10 numbers, and then the letters are such so that they can't be confused with a number. Right. You know, an S and a 5 can be really hard to tell apart. Right. So we don't allow S's to be used. So that's how we ended up with those 15 letters that we generally, you know, it's what we approve for use on these coded markers. The problem that the Peregrine folks got into is the same that the red knot people and other shorebird people is basically they're marking so many birds that they ran out of code combinations. So they start using symbols, and then we start getting into problems because they use symbols that can be confused with whatever. And, you know, we have a few symbols that we've authorized for shorebirds because they're unique enough that they won't be confused with a letter or a number. But the Peregrine people weren't that smart, and then we've got some problems there. So, I mean, you know, these are solvable problems, but it's mostly through coordination. You know, the Peregrine people just started using the symbols and then told us about it, and that's when we ran into problems, as opposed to, you know, the shorebird folks that were running out of codes. What symbols can we use? And then we figured out what those symbols should be. So a lot of this is just coordination. Right now, for Kestrels, that wouldn't be a problem. But, you know, and there are other solutions too. For the peregrine folks, they went, instead of a single color band, they went to, you know, basically split colors, and you know, there's a lot of issues. But if you're marking a lot of birds because of the limitation in letters and numbers, there's always, you know, you can run out of codes for a color combination, for a color pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, this is your opportunity to learn from the peregrines and the shorebirds is, you know, if you're going to use 2-letter codes, then start calculating how many possible combinations you have, and then start taking a look at how many nestling kestrels are banded in a given year, and calculate how long it's going to be before you run out of codes, and you may be surprised. And so, you know, maybe as a community, you want to come up with a different system. Maybe you put a single color length band on for, you know, for a year, and then if you catch them as an adult, where you've got all that juvenile mortality, you know, you're not wasting basically your rings on these nestlings. You know, some large percentage of whom are going to die. You know, so you know, this is a great opportunity for you guys to stop and think about how you're going to do this, and you know. And who's going to be looking for these birds? I mean, again, just like with the shorebirds, you know, you got to, you know, we put a lot of effort into finding our birds again, and we have a lot of, you know, protocols for using that information to help us calculate things like population sizes and things like that. And again, the shorebirds is quite different. But, you know, it's a great opportunity, but, you know, I encourage you all to think these things through before you just sort of go out. Because the shorebirds have had some challenges as well. Not all the countries use the same alphabet as we're using in the United States. So when you're looking at birds from Argentina, well, they can have Z's on them. And so then you're going to like, and we don't use Z's on the green flags. And so, you know, then you got to remember, oh, yeah, that could be a Z or it could be a 2, and you got to stop and look at it and figure it out.
I think, you know, that's one of the reasons we don't put color bands on every single nestling, just because we know the return rate is pretty low. And we want to get the best bang for our buck and for the effort, and so we put them out on some nestlings because we need estimates of juvenile survivorship, right? So that's important in that regard. I think the other important thing Bruce was hitting on and talking about what we do with shorebirds or with peregrine falcons is identifying what our questions are, because that you can get one level of information and answer one kind of question. But if you want to, you know, we want individual estimates of survival, and in the case of our work in Utah, we want it by different landscapes. You know, just knowing the color of a landscape, which is how we decided, okay, we're going to have we have three colors of alphanumeric color bands, we'll put them out in the different landscapes. And quickly realized that, well, when you have neighbor birds, then it's a lot hard, you know, blue and blue, you know, it's harder to get that full alphanumeric code sometimes. And so we started mixing it up so that we could easily distinguish neighbors and get individual identification easier that way. And so identifying, you know, at the local level what your question is, and making sure you can do the marking scheme to answer that question, and then identifying regional and larger questions that you might be able to answer with, you know, keeping that scheme and working up somewhere like that is, you know, that's what symposia like this and partnerships like this are built to do. Let's think about it and let's coordinate what we want to do. And then, you know, the added part is getting everybody looking for color-banded birds. You know, each organization here has social media with a lot of different followers, and that's one way to promote what we're doing, not only for your local level, but for everywhere, because you could end up getting a bird from Saskatchewan in Texas, right? And so you want to think about those things too.
Yeah, and actually that's what I was going to say, is that there are a lot of questions that the scale is really important, because like for individual mortality, juvenile mortality and survival, you really do need to be able to think about these things and track an individual back to, you know where that individual comes from, like each nest box. But I did think that Bruce brought up a good point, thinking about color bands that may not be coordinated across regions or states. You know, I wanted to take that opportunity to say that once we have this like genoscape mapped out, those are the kinds of questions that we can potentially solve, because we can sample those individuals on the breeding ground, and obviously you have to have methods of capturing those individuals individuals that you want to sample. But if you have 2 individuals on the breeding ground that maybe have similar code and you can't figure out if they come from, Connecticut or North Carolina, you could use the DNA signature to kind of figure that kind of stuff out. And I just wanted to point that out. Scale matters.
Okay, so as a highly supervised citizen, and
We all are now.
This is very, very eye-opening. I use uncoded color bands. So, and the BBL is the ultimate, approval agency of all things banned. So, is there, am I sensing a recommendation to either go to coded color bands, or would it be a suggestion that we suspend uncoded color bands until there is some sort of maybe universal approach for this? Where do I go with this? What's your recommendation?
It all depends on why you're marking the birds to begin with. I mean, if what you're doing is to identify the birds that are coming back to your site fidelity during the summer, that sort of thing, then that's fine.
Okay.
The problem we run into is when your birds go down to Florida and Mark's birds go down to Florida and they're wearing the same color bands, we can't tell them apart unless we pull feathers and get DNA done.
Yeah.
And which
What's the geographic range that you look at for colors? Because my master banner made me aware of all of this, and he said, well, the BBA will check within I don't know what the range was or the geographic, and if this isn't being used, you'll be assigned that color, and if somebody else is using it, you won't. But I didn't know how far afield you go with that.
Well, I mean, it varies with the species, and
kestrels.
Yeah, and or songbirds are different than birds of prey because there's no simple answer to that question because it varies with the species. Something like in your case, we would probably look at New England because it's a fairly small area and a bunch of states, and you're in Connecticut and someone in Vermont, and it's not that far away, so we'd probably be looking at New England. A region that way, but if you get out into Texas or something, which is a huge state, we'd only be looking maybe at a portion of Texas because what's in the Rio Grande Valley isn't going to be like that up in the Panhandle.
So a move to coded color bands would alleviate that issue.
Yeah. I mean, the coded color bands would alleviate that sort of regional overlap issue.
Okay.
So that's the advantage of going that route. The problem is using them just for these local studies. Then if you want to do some sort of regional or survivorship or whatever types of projects, and then you're going to run into the situation you're running out of codes and colors or combinations for a type of color, especially over time. Now you could reuse them since kestrels seem to be fairly short-lived. It might be every 10 years you could recycle a code because the kestrel, the bird initially marked that's probably no longer alive. But you still end up with a finite number of code combinations, and in this case, especially for a species that is has a fairly high reproductive rate for a bird of prey, you could end up using up those code combinations pretty quickly, especially if you're marking a lot of young birds.
So Chris, what are your thoughts on this? This sounds like trying to wrestle eels, you can't get your hands on it. So what would your recommendation be to avoid a lot of that kind of thing?
Again, I think, and it gets back to what Dave said, and I agree completely. Depends what are the questions you want to ask. And I think for the local types of studies that what you're doing or what Mark's doing, the color band, the uncoded bands may be fine. Should be fine. And it's just a matter of, the problem would be, especially in New England, is there's probably a half dozen people right now who might want to do that in New England, and then you might very easily run into the problem of overlap. It may not be as big an issue in North Carolina, where there's a lot fewer banders in a larger area. So that's, again, part of this gets down to the priorities of the group and what they view as the important questions too, the priorities that need to be addressed right away.
I would argue you have to go larger regionally. I mean, you had one of my birds from 2008 in Connecticut in 2012, and this year I had a Shenandoah Valley bird in New Jersey, in southern New Jersey. I don't think you want to go just just New England or just New Jersey. I think you have to go at least by flyway, something like the American oyster catchers where they have a color by state. Like, I think you gotta be not just looking at just, oh, hey, it's this region, because I've seen that overlap in New Jersey both ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure once we start doing this, we're gonna, this gets into the site fidelity, that these birds don't necessarily come back to the area where they nested. They might come back somewhat far away, and the advantage of having the color marked birds is you don't have to have the bird in the hand to necessarily
Well, so if I've got a red young that I abandoned in 2008, and he had red that he abandoned in 2011, and then he's got a red bird, but then he gets it in the hand and realizes it's a New Jersey bird instead of his.
Yeah, I won't argue with you on that at all. I mean, the question is, as a group, do you want to go to just use of coded markers? Again, they're a lot more expensive. What's that? They're harder to read, and basically you have a finite number of colors and codes. Now, again, it depends also whether you want to get into some sort of a regional assignment of colors, because that might mean, okay, the Atlantic populations only get 2 colors or 3 colors, and that even reduces your number of combinations even more for that particular flyway and that sort of thing. And so it really depends on the questions and how coordinated or you want to be. And I mean, right now it's not coordinated at all, because people just come to us in the lab and say, I want to put markers on kestrels, and we look at some, who else has come to us, but we're not trying to coordinate any sort of a national program. And I think that's really what this partnership needs to be about, is at least to help define the priorities, help to start defining some of these issues, and then we can make sense of it in a collaborative way. And we're certainly willing to work with the partnership to do that. But we've got to understand what the priorities are too. And right now, I don't understand that.
Right. I'm not using codes. But I think you do have to split them into some sort of flyway or regionality, whether you're using just color or color and markers.
And part of this is, it's really great to know that, because I'm not sure that necessarily that information got back to the lab, because we're doing it based on sort of our seat of the pants knowledge of 900 species of birds across a continent, and it's better for some species than for others, and to know that the Virginia birds are turning up in New Jersey, or could turn up in New Jersey, then that's something that we've got to definitely have to take into consideration as we get other requests in the future. And we need that feedback, because otherwise, we don't know.
You should have my return, because it was a young from them, and I'm pretty sure Tom would have reported his band as well. I mean, that's where I got the information from. But I mean, they're so incidental. Like, how often do you get that bird back in the hand, and the survivorship, all those things? How often does a bird go that far? But you could maybe start to think about some of these things with the colors.
But again, I would get back to, for the partnership is defining the priorities and where you want to go, and how we start to try to make some sense of this before basically we start assigning to everybody in the room wants to do their own local project, and then any sort of collaborative type of effort becomes impossible. And I think you still have, I don't think there's been that many kestrels marked yet that I think that's an issue, but you might be getting there in the not too distant future. And we have some marking that's going on. For example, the APHIS program, when they remove kestrels from airports, they put color markers on all of those birds. And so you do, and they're doing that with basically they have their own national program with their own national codes assigned to their program. And so you have some other programs that are going on that's totally unrelated to the things that are going on is being discussed in this room, and everything we're talking about has to fit in with the needs of the rest of the banding community.
Would it be appropriate for Chris to, put together a survey and start pulling together that information to see, what kinds of questions need to get asked, and
I think that's what the next step needs to be done. Look for leadership, and I mean, looking. I didn't read the paper that Sarah had, lately about recommendation for future research, but I think this is exactly this is what we need to be doing right now, assessing what should be done to assess Kestrel declines.
I'm sure Kristen will have to do anyhow.
Exactly. So I was thinking of him.
So the paper's we just got a minor revision back in Journal of Raptor Research, and we did call for studies, marker capture studies on the survivorship of American kestrels and the drivers of survivorship, especially in areas where kestrels are doing particularly good and particularly bad. So once that comes out, we will print it out and send it right to Bruce.
Hand the microphone back.
Yeah, and we'll put it up on our website, and you can download it there.
So just to interject here, and I have to apologize because I made a bonehead move. Dr. Erica Miller was also supposed to be on this panel, but she's so quiet and unassuming that I just completely forgot that you weren't presenting and didn't put enough chairs up. But Erica is our vet at the zoo, and she's also she holds the banding license for Tri-State Bird Rescue and is a rehabber. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity, Erica, to talk, because it didn't occur to me until we started talking about banding. If you have any thoughts or comments about banding the rehab birds that you might be seeing coming through, or kestrels that are coming through, what kind of implications any kind of banding discussion that has happened so far might be, just from a veterinary standpoint, wildlife rehab standpoint, anything like that. I don't want to put you on the spot or anything.
I don't know if there are implications that come to mind, but I would say where I see rehabilitation not utilized enough here, not associated with banding, but just the whole project is contacting or somehow communicating with rehabilitators, because they're the ones that get nestrals that come out of boxes or that are injured as soon as they fledge, that are pre-fledged type, and can, or especially out of natural cavities, and end up being fledged. And that's mainly how we know where nests are, like in Delaware, is because of the birds that have been found as pre-fledged and are brought into Tri-State. We know exactly where they were found, and they haven't moved far from their nest, and we can find the nest that way. So rehabilitators are a great source for finding existing nest locations, and maybe this is a good spot then to put up boxes or something. So, but as far as banding, I don't know.
To comment on that, and because obviously the banding of rehab birds is also, everything comes through my office at one time or
We do
another.
very limited banding. It's mostly
No, it isn't.
birds.
Not at a nationwide level.
Right.
Basically, there's a lot of, I don't know how many kestrels are rehab banded. I'd have to look that up, but there's a lot of rehab banding and there's a long history there that precedes me, and it was a very controversial history, and I think remains controversial to some degree. My own perspective on that is right now most of the rehab banding that goes on is comparable to the ringing and flinging of, say, migration banding and stuff. They rehab the bird, they turn it loose, and they hope that an encounter record will somehow occur and will inform us of something. And my own perspective is that I think there's a lot that can be learned from rehab, but it's not going to be learned with that approach, and it needs to be done in a more scientific and rigorous method, so that there needs to be follow-up to better understand the survivorship of these rehab birds, or if there are particular rehabbing techniques or practices that improve survivorship. I think there's a lot of potential to improve our knowledge of how rehab fits into some of the even the conservation of kestrels. But it needs to be done in a more rigorous manner than it's been done in the past. And from the lab's perspective, we've pretty much stopped issuing permits to rehabbers to do basically just turn birds loose and hope that it tells us something. And we really want the rehabbers to be like the rest of the banders and have a more specific scientific projects or activities in mind that will inform science. And, you know, and we will wholeheartedly support that, but we're not gonna be really supportive of just, you know, the ringing flame. So I think there's a lot of issues there, and I think it has a role in this partnership too, but I think that may be a whole different discussion.
Go ahead, Joe.
Two comments. One about banding rehab birds. I've been a rehab volunteer since the 1970s, first in Florida and now in Nebraska for over 35 years. They ban their birds before they release them. I have gone out and on a call to an injured bird, and it was a banded bird. Now, initially, I thought, well, gosh, that bird probably wasn't released that long, but that bird had been released for over a year before. It was like, and so to me, I don't know how much data they have like that, but that can be valuable data to the Raptor recovery centers because they know the details of the bird that they work with, and they probably have a sense of probability that it's going to survive, and they try to do as much as they can. On the second note, on a different note, on the value of Raptor recovery, I kind of wanted to say this yesterday. One of the themes that I've gotten through this whole conference is we still don't really know what's causing this decline, and I've seen multiple slides that have said West Nile virus or this disease or that disease. Well, in my experience with the people that run the Raptor recovery centers, they know the conditions of those birds. That for those researchers that want to know what's going on with kestrels, I think if you would contact Raptor recovery centers, that you could get data on the birds that are coming in that are with disease. I bring in a bird and I've never heard them tell me kestrels. This kestrel has West Nile virus, but great horned owls and screech owls and barred owls, there's a variety of birds. They just say, we know, and they'll say, and we've got this many this season. And in Nebraska, they get 300, 400, 500 birds in a year's time. And it all has to be submitted. It's somewhere. It goes to, there's a database has to be for all these. I think that would be possible. Or you say no database.
There's no centralized database now. I mean, it's basically each facility would have their own, you know, they have their own data management system, and they're required to submit certain records, certain information to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on an annual basis as a part of their rehabilitation permit. But it's probably not at that level of detail that they have to, you know, provide the Fish and Wildlife Service. And what the Fish and Wildlife Service does with that data, who knows, but I don't think they have a centralized database for it either. I think those reports go somewhere and get filed.
I can only speak for Nebraska. I know they don't throw it away.
Well, yeah, I understand.
You might have to contact individual Raptor recoveries. I hate to see the kind of you can't do it, the naysay stuff. I think working with Raptor recovery groups could be a potential asset for the AKP.
Well, I mean, that's what I suggested, but I mean, you know, the first thing, you know, if a banded bird gets to a rehabilitation facility, I would hope that they would report it to us. And I think most of them probably do. I wouldn't say all of them do, but I would suspect that the vast majority of those birds get reported to us. And then, you know, obviously as a part of that process, we would tell the rehabilitation facility the banding information that we have on that bird, and the bander would be informed of that encounter. And so that's, you know, that's a routine thing that happens all the time. Now, you know, how you know, this partnership wants to interact with the rehabilitation facility. I said that's something that you know, certainly warrants discussion. But you know, there's you know, it's going to be a process too, because each of these facilities are pretty much independent. You know, there's a network of them, but they're basically independent entities, and you know, it's going to take a fair amount of work to contact each of them and get that information. Not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be you know, it's going to take someone's time, and then the question is what you're going to do with that information. You know, setting up some sort of a data system within this partnership to try to make sense out of the data that comes from the various facilities. It's not impossible, But, it's gonna, it's gonna take some resources to do that.
Erica, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would just say two things. One is there is a national network, the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, that if you are seeking information like that for a specific project, get the information to them and they disseminate it to the members, and then can have members contribute all the data, especially if there's specific data you're wanting, how many animals they see, or what, how many times they are seeing West Nile. So there are also two major electronic databases. Unfortunately, it's two separate, not everybody's using the same database, but Wild Ones and WRMD are used by the vast majority of the larger rehab centers now that are contributing electronic data to a central database about cause of injury. So each year, each one's adding on more. There are more. There's some other, obviously, smaller databases or people have their own, but a vast majority of the data is going into those two databases. And so as time goes on, it will be more readily accessible for sharing.
What are they called again?
One is Wild One, and it's run out of the Wildlife Center of Virginia, and the other is WRMD, Wildlife Rehabilitation Medical Database.
Are those publicly accessible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so.
And since Tri-State does research as well, I mean, what kind of research are as Tri-State Bird Rescue kind of contributing to that might be different from other wildlife rehabbers?
Well, Tri-State was founded originally as oil spill response, and that's the reason we got our banding permit, is we banned oiled birds after they're washed, recovered, and released. And it's been extremely valuable to show, we have pictures of photos of the banded pelicans after the Deepwater Horizon spill on the nest with young. And so we're able to say, yes, these birds survive and they reproduce. And we've gotten blood samples of the chicks to say that they're normal, this sort of thing. So there is a limited, value in that. And most of the vast majority of Tri-State's research is either retrospective through their own database, how many cat attack birds are we getting in and are they surviving, and how many lead poison birds are we getting, to what level, from what areas. We're actually able to find out the areas of heavy lead poisoning, other chemical poisoning incidences. And then we're also doing a lot of research into just like the care, advanced treatment of oiled birds. And so this is the big foundation of Tri-State.
So if you have any other rehab questions, there's your lady. So in the interest of time, let's take a break.